Hi, Jim here, and you're listening to the Honest Filmmaker podcast, career advice from people in the business. This week I spoke to filmmaker Amy Guth. Amy started out as a journalist and now works as a producer on short films and features. She's run a film festival as well as written several books on pitching and also what she calls unapologetic visibility. We covered a number of topics in this chat. Amy talked to me about her career in journalism and how that informed her move into filmmaking. She also spoke about how to pitch to investors and also how to try and get famous cast into your movie. And she also gave me some tips on how to get into film festivals. Enjoy. So can you tell me how you got into the business?
So I always kind of had that in my head, like eventually I'm going to land here and get to this, but I was in journalism for a long time and they felt very intertwined to me. It really felt like journalism was very much a part of, because to me, it's all just about storytelling. The platform is kind of secondary to me. It's about the good stories. So I was in journalism for a very long time. And, I think a lot of people might remember like hearing about the pivot to video in a lot of newsrooms. It was like even before that, I was thinking, there are moments when you're interviewing a person where their pause is so powerful that there's really not a way to describe that in a print story. And so I became interested in just rolling a little bit of video as I was interviewing people, and I was making audio docs and little videos and things like that. And some editors that I was working with were like, no one's going to want that. And then, fast forward a couple of years later, there's a pivot to video. There's video interns right there in the newsroom. And then I was also working in broadcast where I, kind of got thrown into the deep end and had to learn a lot really quickly and really loved that. And so documentary felt like a very natural extension of journalism to me, just in a longer form, because I didn't really have to listen to commercial breaks and obey, the time clock and all of that. I could just sort of let this story be as long as it needed to be. And so that became kind of that extension in. And of course, it didn't take long before I was very interested in scripted work. And I realized that the skills that I had leaned on in journalism actually translated really wonderfully to screenwriting and filmmaking, because, you're writing very quickly, well and accurately in chaos. Like I sat next to a police scanner for 4 years and, right by my head, and worked all kind of hours. And I just sort of trained my brain to just sit down and go. And I think journalism also makes you kind of a natural structuralist. You have to be able to kind of get all these pieces and pull them all together in a really cohesive story. And so I think that just translated really well. But the other piece of that, I think, is that in journalism, you are often talking to somebody on the worst day of their life or the best day of their life, right? They've just won a big award. You got to interview them, or something terrible has happened and you've got to interview them. And I think that made me really approach dialogue and writing dialogue in a different way, because I really felt very strongly, and I read a ton of scripts as a producer, that there's like a lot of kind of, I call it throat clearing language that gets in the way in a lot of scripts before we just like get to the point, because today's the day that big thing is going to happen. And so it's been interesting to me to kind of connect those dots of things that I leaned on in journalism and how they've translated into the film world really well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And just before I move on to the filmmaking, obviously journalism's another creative career that people can get into.
Yeah.
What would be give me your bite-sized top tips? If I'm leaving uni and I want to be a journalist, what should I do?
Well, first of all, bless you. Do it. We need, I feel like we need lots of journalists in the world. The job of it is to hold people in power accountable, and that's what drew me to it. I thought that was really interesting, and I have long thought, oh, if you put good information in front of people, they will do good things with that information, and we've seen that isn't necessarily true now, and that people will kind of choose, like kind of cherry pick their own sets of information, pick their own facts to support whatever thought they have. They'll kind of prove out their point. So I think it's very important that we have a lot of people in journalism. I think right now is a fascinating moment in journalism, that it has this opportunity to reboot, because there was kind of this swell of this anti-press sentiment that's come up in the last few years. And so I think it's a moment, actually, I know that kind of turned a lot of people off of journalism, but I think actually it's a moment for really smart, sharp people to enter that space and say, we have a moment to kind of reset this a little bit. And there have been some watchdog organizations that have put out kind of like reporting guides around really big topics like climate change and about the refugee crisis and things like that. And I think both of those kind of big topics like that, and war, and big things like that, really invites us to take a moment and unpack journalism and reassemble it in a new way for these kind of dire issues. Because I think it's a moment to redefine, like, what does down the middle really mean right now? If one side is not listening to science, or if one side is just making up things and just kind of saying strange sound bites. Certainly in this country, anyways, where, in the US, is where moving towards a presidential election in November, I think there's a lot of journalists asking themselves that question. So the advice I would give is, like, be dive into the topics that you are interested in and learn them backwards and forwards, because that will help you develop a beat in a much smarter way, and get a lot of bylines, get a ton of bylines. I think freelancing is really important. And I think building your presence on platforms is really important. I have long said that there will be a day where the person matters more than the platform, and which is not to say the platforms aren't going to matter, but that people will say, this person I trust with this information.
Yeah.
I trust this person to share right and share well, so I'm going to follow them no matter where they go. And so I think that's important. But I see sometimes, and this is like a tangent I could go on for days, but sometimes I see journalists having, like, especially like young career journalists, early career, having like a personal account and a professional. And I disagree with that, because you can really step in a lot of problems that way. But I think it's important to just decide, like, this is how I'm going to present in the world, and I'm going to build this presence. And you can be human on there, but decide, this is the area, science journalism or politics or whatever that thing is. And really kind of commit to that, and commit to really learning that space and building those relationships, because they will pay off throughout the reporting.
Yeah. Amen to that. And I think that's applicable. I always say this to students for filmmaking. If you can pick something you're specializing in early and become an expert on it, you've got so much more capacity to learn in that area. And in a way, a master of, knowing a little bit about everything is good, but you'll never really get that sort of extra knowledge that will catapult you in that career. And the other thing to that is, you can always change your mind. If you don't like the thing that if you got into sound and you end up hating it, you can always flip it and move into something else.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think it's important to follow those kind of passions, to let them grow and develop, and lead into what's interesting to you. And I think that will rarely steer anyone wrong.
Yeah. So talking about the move into filmmaking, the first films you made, so the sort of people out there listening who are first-time filmmakers, trying to raise finance for a film, talk me through that process for you. Where'd you get the money from? How'd you get these films off the ground?
Yeah. Well, the first few things I did, I funded myself. I've experimented with a lot of different types of funding. What I think is most effective is to, like, assign yourself that project and decide, I'm going to learn how to do that backwards and forwards. Because I think in the film world, we have this idea, this bothers me. This like keeps me up at night, but kind of this like learned helplessness, because we have this idea, and I think it's like a holdover from the early studio system, that if you are just really darling and you are out there, that someone's going to like pluck you out of obscurity and, like, quote unquote, discover you. And I have always found that so problematic, because it feels so passive, and it feels like, why would you leave your whole career and ambition and dream up to, like, someone's whim that maybe doesn't even like you? Like, who knows? Like, I think you can take a lot more control of that. And the way you can do that is learn that business side. And there's a lot of resources to do that. And so that's just learning the basics of how to exploit grants, how to apply for a grant, how to write a grant well. There's a ton of resources and learning on that, and information available. Learning about regional incentives of, certain economically depressed areas. If you film in them, there's an incentive there. There's the general state tax incentive. Just kind of learning the basics on that, I think, can really go very far, because I think we kind of rely on people just kind of going, hey, I want to make my film, do you want to invest in it? And as a producer, I get pitched a lot. And the question is always, why you? What's in it for me to, what happens if I back your film, if I participate in your film? And you have to answer those questions in that business plan. And so it sounds daunting, and and I think we're sometimes a bit precious about like, no, I'm the artist, I don't do the business side, I leave that to someone else. But you need to learn that. And I think the more that the barrier to entry on filmmaking has dropped a bit, because equipment is, it's easier to get it's easier to get equipment, it's easier to get information than ever. We have the opportunity to know more and to do more. And I'm not saying it's ideal to wear a bunch of different hats. You shouldn't, because that's going to reduce the quality of your work. But you should know. You should absolutely know, if nothing else, just to protect yourself from, people that are predatory. But to know about that can really get you very far, because who believes in your project more than you? Nobody. Nobody will ever believe in your project more than you do. So to learn how to exploit those kinds of incentives, I think the ideal formula for a feature film is only about 25% of that money is what you need to go raise. The rest of that you can accomplish with grants and tax incentives, and you've kind of securitized all of that. And learning that, you have to kind of dive in and do it. But I think that is so very, very important to learn that kind of thing, because it really just sort of puts you in the driver's seat and takes you out of this idea of like, someone's going to discover me if I'm
Yeah.
nice, and that's just not, I just don't think that's practical anymore.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd spent the first couple of years we went to the Cannes Film Festival. I think we had that naive impression that someone was going to watch our film and go, "Hey, here's $2 million. Go and turn it into something else." And it just doesn't
Right.
work like that. And like you say, that business side, learning that stuff will protect you from being screwed over. And obviously,
Absolutely.
that's the main thing that happens.
Yeah.
Um, so the thing I want to talk to you about on your website, there's two terms you used, which I've written down: compounding visibility and
Hmm.
unapologetic visibility. Can you tell
Yeah.
me what that means?
Yeah. I mean, with compounding visibility, I think that we as filmmakers, we kind of go, well, I put my work out there and nothing happened. Oh, well, I'll have to do another one. And we kind of keep starting from scratch. And I think investing in your networks is so very, very important. The idea of networking kind of has this like bad connotation that it's sleazy. It's only sleazy if you don't mean it. If you're actually just talking to people that are interesting to you and having conversations of interest with people who have things in common with you, you will build those networks. But I can't tell you how many times I have seen filmmakers either never follow up with someone that they met at a film festival. I know I've certainly written to people and they'll go, hi, yeah, I remember you, and then they just kind of trail off and they don't ever follow up. And they've been people I really, wanted to work with as a producer, and they've just kind of fallen off. And I think there's some self sabotage there. But I think there's this idea that we, somehow being visible is like bragging, when you're just saying the facts. Like, I made a feature film and we won this award. It's the truth. It's real. And I know there's like cultural nuances there that doesn't translate into every part of the world. But for the most part, I think if we set that up right and well, and if we do really good press outreach for every single festival stop, we're compounding that so that we don't have to start from scratch over and over. And where I kind of got that idea was, for a while, I was brought in to kind of reboot a film festival in Chicago and did that for about a year and a half. And in that time, I saw all of these filmmakers with really stunning films that just had done such a great job. And I was so proud to screen those films at the festival. And then I would see them again after their next film. And I was like, why did that film not do anything? And I think people don't realize that delivering a finished, wonderful film is only the first half of the piece of it. You have to know what to do after that. And you have to be able to talk about your film. And so often I find filmmakers and I say, tell me what your film's about. And the log line's right there, just tell me what the log line is. But instead, I'll kind of get this like, shuffling the feet, hands in the pocket. Oh, well, I guess it's like sort of a rom-com. I don't know. It's fun. I don't know. It's sort of my life, I guess. I don't know, whatever. And they're kind of dismissive about it. And it's like, I don't want people to come in and be like, I have the best film in the world, get excited. But there's this middle ground that we don't talk about, right? I think we're so afraid of looking like braggarts that we do ourselves this disservice, and we're afraid to promote it or talk about it, or really invest in learning how to talk about it and how to network and building our networks and all of that. And I think just being in that middle space of saying the truth of a thing. I made this film. It took this amount of time. This was the budget. Here's who I worked with, and these are the awards that we won. We're very excited about it. I think just being very straightforward about your work does a lot, and that builds that. And so I'm kind of obsessed with the word visibility because I've seen so many filmmakers, that's the only thing standing in their way. They're so talented. They're connected. They're getting really talented people in their films. They might even get distribution a little bit, but it's only they kind of will say, "Oh, well, it was luck," or "Oh, I knew a person." Like, invest in that, nurture that relationship, and keep building so that every with each new film, you're not starting from scratch, so that you're kind of building on, hey, I met this person when I was on the festival circuit of my last film, and now they're doing this, and that person would be a great person to partner with, or that director I met a couple of years ago would be perfect for this next project. And I think that's how you build that. And you can be strategic about that without being, an opportunist or sleazy about it. If you are just connecting with the people that you're connecting with, when you talk with someone, you get a feeling like this is an interesting person and I want to stay in touch with them. And I think nourishing that goes a very, very long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was two things I was going to pick up from there. I've said this before. British people, we're terrible about bragging. We get embarrassed. We don't like doing it. It makes us cringe. But you're right. You've got to talk about your project. You've got to get other people to care about it. And the other thing I was going to say was, if you've got a film out there now and it's on a platform and it's maybe you're getting revenue from it from advertisers, then you need to just keep talking about it. And
Yeah.
if you're talking about it online, chances are the same people aren't going to see you continually talk about it because of the way the algorithm works. So
Yeah.
don't be frightened to keep promoting.
Yeah.
So you touched upon film festivals there. What's been your experience of film festivals, and having run one, are there any tips for getting into a film festival?
I have so many tips about getting into a film festival, but I think you cannot be discouraged by a rejection, because sometimes it really does come down to, I have to program this and it has to fit in 38 minutes to leave time for the talk back at the end. And this film is 8 minutes too long. It really can come down to things like that sometimes. And that's disheartening, because, your film should be as long as it needs to be and as short as it possibly can be. And sometimes, like, you just get a weird film, like it's 17 minutes. That's hard to program. So you can't take things like that too personally. I think the cover letter is so overlooked. I used to get all these submissions, and maybe not even half, no way, maybe a third of them had cover letters. And of the cover letters, they acted like they were terrified of me. And I think with anything that you pitch, you have to reframe the way you think of the gatekeeper that you're pitching. Nobody I know who is working as an editor in journalism, or who is running a film festival, or who is gatekeeping any kind of portal that we might need to get through in a creative career, is ever like licking their chops and just waiting to be evil and mean to a creator. A creator will solve your problem. If it's a dynamite film that's a slam dunk, you have just filled a programming block. That's exciting for me. If you pitch an editor something you've written and it's amazing, you've just done them a huge service, because now they know what they're going to print that day or publish on the website or whatever. And I think as creatives, we have got to reframe that and not treat our gatekeepers like like they're these evil people ready to just strike us down and destroy us. We have to just kind of say, hey, here's this film, here's what it's about, and let me know what's in it for my audience. And sometimes we just kind of go like scatter and just enter every film festival we think of. I think it is very important to be very strategic about what film festivals we enter and why. I have a spreadsheet that I make for every single film, and it doesn't vary too much, but I will copy it and kind of tweak it for each project. And it's ranked by priority, and then submission date or notification dates or screening dates, because there's premiere requirements, and you don't want to find out that you got into, say, Toronto or a big festival like that, when you just said like, okay, sure, to this regional one that's in some dude's backyard, right? No offense to that dude in his backyard. I'm sure it's a great festival, but you want to be strategic and say, okay, I think I have a shot at these bigger festivals, or, maybe a little bit smaller than that. Kind of figure out what's my North Star here. What am I aiming at? look at the premiere requirements. And if there is a premiere requirement, prioritize that and kind of plan around it and plan for kind of a long run on that. Because I'll see people go like, okay, I want all of it to happen in the month of June. And they'll just like throw in all these, and they'll end up kind of, their premiere will be somewhere weird where they don't have a connection. Talk to your cast and find out, where's your cast from? There might be like a really big hometown party that someone's just like waiting to throw because your leading man or your leading lady is from a town where there's a film festival. That can pay off hugely. So I think being strategic about where you're applying, not only will that save you a lot of heartache, but it'll save you a lot of money because you're not just kind of throwing it out everywhere. But then when you approach that festival, and if there's a connection to it, say so. Say, hey, the lead of this film is from that area, grew up there, has went to college there, whatever. Or say, I mean, I've said myself in film festival cover letters, I've said I'm from there, and I would love to pack the house with kind of hometown friends that I've known my whole life. And I think that kind of goes that goes a long way, because there's a lot of things that factor in, and sometimes like, this filmmaker doesn't have any connection to this. These two films are both really good. This person has no connection to this and hasn't premiered anywhere. We don't know anything about them. They didn't write a cover letter. And then this person, look, they're from here. They clearly know about this festival. They have a plan for some press outreach while they're there. That seems more intriguing to me as a programmer. So I might kind of tilt the scale in their favor.
Great tips to remember those. Another thing I noticed on your site was you've got a bunch of books. So it's amyguth.com. So there's books you can get on there that are really useful. And one of them's called The Real Talk Pitch Guide for pitching. Yes. So I was thinking, what would be your tips for pitching a movie?
Who are you pitching to? A producer or a film festival?
Oh God, what do I want? Do I want money? I'll tell you what, how about this? We've covered investment a little bit. So say I'm pitching to get someone a name in my film. How can I convince them to be in it?
Yeah. That's always kind of a fun thing, right? Because it's very specific to the person. And it can be, if it's like a person who hasn't worked in a while, that's going to be a different kind of pitch of like why you want to draw them out into your film, versus if it's somebody who's very busy and it's going to be hard to get. So I think first you need to do your research. There's a lot of tools for that. IMDb Pro can get you pretty far to just figure out who are they represented by, who are they connected to. See first, is that agent representing anybody I know? That'll go pretty far. You can sometimes get a recommendation that way. See if they're connected to anybody on your LinkedIn. See if they're like, oh, this agent knows my agent. Okay, we can make this work. Or they went to college where I went to college. Okay, we can figure that out. Look for those kind of connections. And if it makes sense, use them. If not, I think, again, just like approaching like a human being and not this big scary gatekeeper, assuming you're going to get a no. Approach with like, here's why this role would be so great for your client, will go really far, because I think we have a tendency when we pitch to list out what's in it for me and not what's in it for you, who I am pitching. And that's so important. And that can go so very, very far. That can go for anything. Asking somebody for a favor or for some information, the dreaded pick your brain, get coffee email, like you can get a very different response if you frame it around what's in it for them. So I think definitely framing it in terms of like, here is why your client would be great. And if the answer is they're just famous and I want a famous person in my film, I think I would encourage you to maybe like think through that a little bit and just think about, are they the best person, or am I just kind of trying to cast a wide net and get a big name in it? Because that can get tricky and that can get disappointing and discouraging, and you can sink a lot of time in that. And you can also exhaust your investors, because there's this moment in investing when you'll talk to some investors and they'll go, okay, if you can get so-and-so who you're thinking for this, I will commit. And then you go to that person's agent and they're like, oh, interesting. Okay, maybe let's talk about it. And then they're like, okay, if you can make sure that you've raised, 50% or 75% of your funding, we'll give you a letter of intent. So you then go back to your investors and say, okay, they're in if, and you're going back and forth to all of these people. Your investors or your potential investors can get fatigued if you keep coming back to them and saying, okay, no, it's not going to be Brad Pitt, it's going to be Tom Cruise. Okay, no, it's not going to be Tom Cruise, it's going to be this guy. And you keep doing that, they're not going to feel like you're organized. They're not going to feel like you have a clear vision. They're just going to feel like you're just kind of grabbing for names to try to get whoever. So I think that's really the big two, right? Is like, be clear on who you're pitching and why, who you want to get there, and keep it a short list. You don't, I mean, you might get a bunch of no's and have to keep going further down your list, but be clear and frame it in terms of what's in it for that client. Like, hey, I have heard your client is trying to switch out of comedy into dramatic roles. This is one. There's also an opportunity. They could be they could be an executive producer on this. And that's like music to a lot of actors' ears. Sometimes they're like, oh, yes, I want to be taken more seriously. I would love a producer credit and I would love this dramatic role. Okay, done. So you have to kind of do a little research on those people and see, like, what do they want, and then speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming from a micro low budget side, horror, I would say that there's total value in going for a cult star, someone who's been in
Yeah,
something. Maybe they've, like you say, they've not worked for a while, or they've not ever sort of stepped out of that one role they're famous for, but they've got a fan base who are, committed and will go and see that person. That's a
absolutely.
really good one, especially if they've got kind of recognized internationally. Again, that means when you're trying to sell it to different territories, you're going to get more interest from distributors.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so taking you right back, we're going back in time now, and I'm asking the young Amy. I'm going to tell the young Amy what she should know before she starts her career. So, what do you wish you'd known before you started?
Wow. What's funny is I think, like, where some kids like play house or play, domestic kind of things, I always played work. I played film set and I played newspaper room, and I was playing in the newsroom, and I had a little newspaper that I did. I was always doing this. So when people say, like, why did you pick this career path? I'm like, it kind of picked me. It was kind of there. I sort of woke up with it. But that said, um, I was raised in a fairly traditional environment in terms of gender roles. And so I was probably a teenager before I ever really like saw women being very assertive and straightforward. So there was a little bit of unlearning there. And luckily that's just kind of who I am. And so what used to feel like friction when I was growing up, because I was a little bit too straightforward and too unfiltered, has served me well, but I wish I just got to it sooner. I wish I just kind of had that backbone a little bit earlier in my career. And I wish I would have trusted myself sooner, because the like at the end of the day, everything is figure outable, and you can find a person that can answer it. If you absolutely cannot figure it out, you can find a person. There are Facebook groups for everything. There's somebody that knows the answer to that if you really just can't figure this out. And I wish I would have just kind of trusted myself sooner that, like, hey, it's figure outable. Everything is. And you can do that. You're a smart person and you can figure it out. And, because I think there's just so many messages, especially for women, that, you don't know, you need to be polite, you need to be liked. You're like, no, you just need to get your work done, actually.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you want more advice from industry professionals who are out there at the moment working, or you just want to listen to some cool stories from film sets from around the world, then please do subscribe.